If you were asked to choose the most fabulous locomotive in English engineering, who would it be? Oliver Cromwell? King George V? Taliesin, Iron Duke, Thomas the Tank Engine perhaps? Well, any one of them would be an excellent choice. Still, for the most fabulous character of all, I would nominate a Scotsman. Flying Scotsman, 4472. References aside, it is widely accepted the most famous engine in all of Britain, and perhaps the world, is Flying Scotsman. Being one of the first successful Pacific designs of the English Isle, having travelled both domestically and abroad, a basis for a certain express engine, and an overall appealing aesthetical design, for the most part, it is no real surprise as to Scotsman's celebrity status. But now I pose a salient question. If Scotsman represents the United Kingdom, what engine represents the United States? For many an inquisitive hour I have pondered said question. The answer would have to be
bold, dramatic, heroic.
Something that would epitomize the American ideal. Therefore, the engine I believe best represents the US is CP-173. Some of you who are familiar with my channel are already wondering, what? You didn't pick E.P. Ripley, your favorite locomotive? I'll get back to her, have no fear.
Is that so? We'll have to see about that then, won't we?
To understand why 173 is a symbol of American locomotive engineering, we must first understand her background and career on the rails. 173 was built in 1864 by Norris Lancaster for the Western Pacific Railroad, who designated the engine class as H and dubbed her Sonoma. The WP would be absorbed by the Central Pacific in 1869 with the completion of the WP's line from Sacramento to Alameda Terminal and Oakland Pier. With the acquisition of the railroad also came the acquisition of their rolling stock and, subsequently, Sonoma, who was then numbered 173. In November of the same year, she was involved in a wreck with 177 near Alameda Junction, rendering both engines practically unusable. As such, CP Master Mechanic of the Sacramento Locomotive Shops, A.J. Stevens, was charged with rebuilding 173. Stevens rendered many of the engine's parts both unharmed and reusable, motivating him to take this golden opportunity to treat 173 as an experimental engine to bring the CP into the locomotive erecting business. At last, in 1872, the extensive rebuilding had created a brand new locomotive and brought new life to 173. Her design proved so unique and successful it prompted the CP to build 12 other engines in her design. When other rolling stock came to be serviced at the Sacramento shops, they were fitted with Stevens' own personal flair of tools and mechanics based upon 173s that would ultimately give the CP their own personal look when it came to their engine fleet. Much in the same way that GWR has a standard design of 460 engines or even the PRR. She apparently led a good life on the CP, being renumbered twice under the Southern Pacific as 1285 in 1891 and then 1523 in 1907. Unfortunately, by 1909 she had become out of date for the Southern Pacific's fleet, forcing them to retire her in 1909 to the scrapping yard. At this point, the comparison could be made. If 173 is the best engine to represent America, why is it she doesn't exist anymore like Scotsman?
Yeah!
If we required the symbols of our nation to survive to present day, then we wouldn't bother to remember our forebears such as Mr. Lincoln, Washington, or anyone who helped mold our country. Just because they are not physically here with us today does not mean they don't emblemize who we are.
USA! 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 USA!
In fact, the primary premise as to why 173 best symbolizes the US, besides the ingenuity to take a pre-existing engine and redesign her to the extent of making a completely different and better locomotive, is because of her legacy to the railroading community. As previously stated, 12 engines were erected in 173's design, one of which was built for the Virginian Truckee as their number 18, Dayton, the only present-day surviving engine of the class. Dayton had an interesting life as a plowing engine for the V&T, a film star at Paramount, portraying UP-119 and Promontory, all before being given a cosmetic restoration with her original parts to be a display engine at the Nevada State Railroad Museum in Carson City, where she resides today. As also previously stated, 173's legacy can be seen in fellow members of the CP roster with Stevens' ornate and mechanical features, such as chimneys and domes. This, however, is merely the beginning of 173's legacy. For the 1939 World's Fair in San Francisco, famed railroader, historian, author, and photographer Gerald M. Best would create a half-inch scale replica of 173, based on old specifications and scale drawings from the Southern Pacific records, to display at the fair. This model would go over tremendously well at the fair, but 9 years later, she would be seen by the eyes of one who would secure 173's legacy forever, Walt Disney. In his own words,
"Its old-time diamond stack intrigued me."
To the point of wanting his own version of the engine, which would eventually become Lily Bell, practically an exact 1/8 scale replica of the engine, sharing the number 173, but the artistic flair on the tender and slightly modified sand dome would be his own. With the popularity of Walt's engine and the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad, in the multiple railroading magazines, Roger Brogy's blueprints would be recreated to allow fellow modelers to replicate old 173 to a T. Although Carrollwood was short-lived, 173 would serve another inspiration for Walt's purposes. The only two requirements for Walt's park would be to be unlike anything else in the world, and to be surrounded by a train. When Disneyland was finally coming to fruition, Walt had to decide what kinds of engines he would want encircling his happy place. With scale drawings already at his disposal, Lily Bell served as the best resource for his two engines. Certain modifications had to be made in order to accommodate the practicality of a 5/8 scale engine. That would be a traditional narrow gauge engine of 3 feet, meaning that these engines would not be exact replicas of Lily Bell. Engine 1, C.K. Holiday, would fittingly take the place of a freight engine for services stationed at Frontierland, and be a cosmetic duplicate of the base's engine, Lily Bell. Engine 2, E.P. Ripley, would be a mechanical twin to Holiday, but would aesthetically be her own self. Ward Kimball suggested a coal-burning capstack engine from the eastern seaboard, Baltimore and Ohio 774 in fact, to be the inspiration for Ripley's look. Several liberties were taken with 774's design in order to make an intrinsically better and astounding engine as we know Ripley today. See, I told you I'd get back to Ripley.
Good.
And, true to Walt's former habits, the Disneyland Railroad ended up being the first attraction to be completed within the park. The reward? Moving timber and other supplies to where it was needed on the premises before opening day. Over the years, with increased passenger traffic, more rolling stock and engines were needed for the railroad. In 1958, Walt salvaged Fred Gurley and constructed the Excursion 3 train for her to display the newest attraction for the railroad, the Grand Canyon Diorama. In that time, it was considered to construct another engine from scratch that would be very similar to Holiday. It was decided on budgetary reasons to salvage another engine, and that is how the railroad acquired Ernest S. Marsh, the railroad's fourth engine. The Disneyland Railroad is not the only railway to have lineage to 173. With Florida's Walt Disney World Railroad, Engine 1, Walter E. Disney, has 173's signature chimney, ever so reminiscent of A.J. Stevens' design. Also, every engine on the Walt Disney World Railroad shares similar domes reminiscent to those on 173. With France's Disneyland Railroad, all engines were designed using Holiday's mechanics and even aesthetics. This is truly a nod to the Central Pacific practice of having a standard design influence the entire engine fleet of the railway. Truly, 173 owes a great deal of her legacy to the Disney parks. It is not just Disney who keeps 173's spirit alive in modern day. Several live steam companies and railroad enthusiasts have utilized the aforementioned drawings from Roger Brogy to construct their own inspired versions of 173. Furthermore, for railway modelers of HO, O, G, or even N, 173 provided a great addition to any model railroader's layout. There are also a number of films, games, and other such media who feature locomotives reminiscent of 173, all of which serve to remind the modeler, railroader, and public not only of genius engine design, but also a great moment in American steam locomotion. When it comes to finding a symbol for a nation, it can prove difficult to choose but one to signify all that one stands for. But personally, I believe I have figured it out. Great Britain may have the Great Flying Scotsman, but we in the United States have 173. From a simple career on the Western Pacific to the phoenix story of rising from the ashes of a wreck as a standard bearer on the Central and Southern Pacifics, to then an undying legacy in other forms. Just as the U.S. stands as a symbol for democracy, 173 will continue to live on in railroading history, and as the locomotive that best represents the United States of America.